Hello everyone. Well, let me begin by first dedicating this class to a good friend whose yahrzeit is on the 8th of Kislev, Hebrew name Moshe Chaim ben Beryl Velvel. Some of you may remember him, Mark Fisher. So we dedicate the class to his elevating soul and the merit of our studying together, and hopefully touching each other will help his soul's journey and vice versa. Because though souls may not be seen by our eyes, if one understands that there's a deeper reality, it's simply two sides of a curtain. And though we can't see those souls, they definitely can see us. So those of us living in this material world have a narrower perspective on existence. And even today, in knowing some modern physics, we know energy is everywhere. And actually, even existence itself, material matter itself, is really energy. So when you look at a table or a chair or your own body, it's really just a container, a shell, that contains and manifests energy. However, being people of the world of matter, we relate to things that are tangible, that our senses experience. And the spiritual reality is something that's more exotic, abstract, distant from us. But in truth, the secret to all life really is about learning to bridge these two realities, or actually come to discover that there is no duality and they are really two parts of one higher reality. So with that said, let's go straight to the topic, which is, are you trapped? One of the greatest challenges you find, whether it's in modern times or throughout history, has always been the issue of whether we human beings can get out of the different trappings and forces that seem to keep us locked. On a very basic psychological level, the first thing anyone who goes to therapy will acknowledge, or will try to acknowledge, is that I can't get out of this stuck place. Whether I'm in a bad relationship or no relationship, or a bad job, or just in a bad state of mind, psychologically, being stuck is one of the biggest issues. How do you get yourself out of a stuck place? So, whether it's the word trapped or stuck or other forces controlling us, one way or another, each of us have to deal with this dilemma, either our entire lives or at least a big part of our lives. And it takes on many different shapes and forms. It could be a physical type of being stuck, where you literally feel you can't get out of your physical place, either where you live or your situation, or, and even worse, is when it's psychological traps. Because a psychological trap plays games with our minds and our hearts, and fears and insecurities come into play, whether they're real or not real, but in our minds they're real enough to not let us make a move. Now, if none of the above fits you, then I'd love to have a conversation with you and find out why, because I don't think anybody on earth does not have some trap. The question is whether we're actually stuck or we can get out of it is another story, but we all will face challenges. We'll face new situations. Just the mere cycles of life create situations that are new, and when they're new, sometimes we don't know how to deal with them, so we can become paralyzed, what's called doubt. Doubt is another form of being trapped, where you're stuck not knowing which way to go. So you end up in a type of status quo situation on the fence, not going this way, not going that way, which itself is also a choice, and that can create a whole new series of problems. Many people think, if I don't make a choice, it's not that bad because I didn't decide this way or that way. But sometimes that's even worse than making the bad choice, because then you get used to a situation that is limbo. A limbo situation can last many, many years. I know people who are still in a place they cannot make a decision, and the more the years that roll on, the more difficult it becomes to make the decision, and then that becomes their new reality, a type of paralysis. Some people cover their tracks in sophisticated ways, so it doesn't look like paralysis, but at the end of the day, it's really, that's what it is. Like, I think one of these hedge funds advertises the greatest risk is not taking any risk. So they use it for financial purposes. But I think psychologically and emotionally it's even stronger. Which is why in Judaism, concept of Amalek, the arch enemy of the Jewish people, so Amalek in psychological terms is the idea of doubt. Amalek in Suffolk, in Hebrew Suffolk, which is doubt, is the same gematria, same numerical equivalent. The letters in Hebrew, as we know, the Hebrew letters add up to different they add up different numbers. Every letter is a equivalent to a number. So Amalek, the 4 letters, Ayin, Mem, Lamed, Kuf, of Amalek adds up to the same amount as Suffolk as doubt. Because that was what Amalek did, throws doubts into you. And doubt can be far worse in many ways than actually making a mistake. Because you make a move and you make a mistake, fine, you learn from your mistakes. But doubt just paralyzes you. And paralysis always feeds into lack of confidence. And the more you don't make the move, the more time that one doesn't make a move, the more fearful it becomes to make the move. This is where most of us get trapped in routines, our habits, our addictions, and so on. So the list goes on in how one can be trapped. I can go on here, speak for an hour about it, but I think everybody can fill in the blanks. And whatever it is that you would call a trap, whatever it is that you feel a challenge you cannot overcome, would fit the bill here. Now, what the relevance of it is obviously because the themes I always address here are always about finding some relevant message in the weekly chapter or in the time that we're in, or general lessons of Judaism and Torah which go back thousands of years. And I always tell people that modern psychology is 100 years old. Torah psychology is almost 4,000 years old. So it's we have a pretty good, pulling rank, pretty good seniority and experience. And the Jewish people are still here after all they've suffered. So if you want a study of success, you have to look at people who've been at the brink, at the abyss, at the brink of extinction, and made it. They must know something about the human psyche. And it's exactly correct. If you delve into the Torah and probe it, you find tremendous lessons that far precede modern psychology, and in many ways are far more profound, and as I said, time-tested. When China opened up to the Western world in the early 70s, when President Nixon traveled there, so it was the first time a Western journalist had an opportunity to speak to the Chinese. So Western journalists asked Zhou Enlai, who was the first prime minister after Mao Zedong, which was a very severe communist regime, they asked him, what does he think about what the Western world considers to be its God? What does he think about the French and American revolutions, which is considered in the Western world the beginning, a world of freedom, world of human rights, etc. So they asked Mao Zedong. The Chinese civilization, of course, was completely unaware and completely cut off from the Western world for so long. What does he think about the American and French Revolution? And his answer is classic. His answer was, it's too early to tell. Because the Chinese civilization is a few thousand years old, or whatever it is, and then this is only a few hundred years old. So, I don't know if you know this, but the Chinese don't respect anyone in the world except Jews. And I believe the reason for it is because Jews precede them in time. When you have senior ranking, you usually don't respect someone who's like a newcomer because you have more experience and more time, trial and error. The Jews are the only ones that precede the Chinese. So I never surveyed this, but that's one of my assumptions is why they respect the Jews for that reason. So the problem is that Jews don't respect the Jews, and for good reasons often, because either in our own family we're always very critical of our own. You know how it is when someone criticizes your brother or sister, you always are insulted, but in private you criticize them more than anyone else does. But someone else does, you're offended because that's like criticizing your family. So we know how to bicker and fight, and the biggest anti-Semites are often Jewish. I remember once speaking it was in Woodstock actually, and someone asked me a question about that it says in Tanya and other places it talks about the Jews as a chosen people. Now whatever the explanation for that is, and obviously it's a controversial discussion, so it was a double question. The guy asked me, he said to me, what's my position on that matter, and in my travels and my talks, do I ever get the question asked? So I said to him, yes, the second question answers the first question. I always get the question asked, but only by Jews, never by non-Jews. And then later I found out he was the rabbi of the place I was speaking at. So it's interesting how Jews look at each other, and maybe it's time to appreciate what is in our own backyard, which is that the Torah precedes all other books and has survived, not just survived, remains an enduring beacon of light of what human rights are. Concepts that are just recently 200-300 years old in the respect of every individual's rights, the respect to the embracing of a path of justice and tzedakah, mishpat, justice and charity, principles that are really, as I said, part of the modern age, go back thousands of years. That's what Abraham, almost 3,800 years ago, was advocating. So when you look in the Torah and you look with those type of eyes, and you're able to strip many of the stories from their so-called literal, the geographical place and time, you find these brilliant and timeless insights that address issues that are as relevant today as ever. So this question about are we trapped and not trapped, and how one gets out of their traps, is addressed throughout the Torah, of course, in general, but specifically also in this week's chapter. So the chapter begins, chapter Vayetze Yaakov meBe'er Shava is the beginning of the chapter, and the title Vayetze. Vayetze means, and Jacob left the city of Be'er Shava. Be'er Shava means Beersheba is a city right now in Israel. That's the city where he lived. And Beersheba literally means a fountain of seven. That's what it means. Because it was a place where there were 7 fountains, there were 7 springs of water. And it says Vayelech Harana, and he went Harana toward the direction of a city called Haran. Haran was a city northeast of Beersheba, like what would be today's modern day, approximately Syria, Iraq, that area. It's actually the place where Abraham originated from earlier on. There's different. And why was Jacob running there? He was escaping, first of all, the wrath of his brother Esav, for Esav felt that Jacob had stolen his blessings. But even more importantly, he was going to look and build a family, because his parents, in the end of last chapter, told him to go to Haran to find a wife. And in this city of Haran, in this chapter, we'll learn actually how Jacob does build his family, and 20 years later returns to Israel and to Beersheba. But the beginning of the story is Vayetze Yaakov Beersheba. He leaves this and goes with Harana, and the verse continues that he arrived at a place where he rested. He went to rest for the night. As the sun set, he took stones from around the area, placed them under his head, and went to sleep. And he had a dream. Vayachlem. He had a dream. And behold, he sees a ladder with its feet, the feet of the ladder are firmly planted on the ground. The ladder says Solomutz of Arza standing on the ground, V'reishe Magia Shemaim, and the head of the ladder is reaching into the heavens. And he sees angels of God climbing up and descending on this ladder. I'm just reading literally the opening chapters. And God stands above him, he says, and promises him and says, I'm the God of your fathers, Abraham and of Isaac, and you are resting on the land, the land that you are resting on, I will give to you and to your children. So clearly he's in the land of Israel. We will soon learn as well that the place where actually he was resting was the Temple Mount. Yes, the famous Temple Mount that we see now in Jerusalem, right behind the Kotel. When you climb the Temple Mount, where the temple would later be built. And then God gives them this great promise, one of the greatest of all promises, which has been fulfilled till this very day. He says, "V'hoya zaracha," and your children will be like the dust of the earth, meaning plentiful, multiple, as the dust. V'faratzta yoma v'kedma v'tzafena v'negma, and it will be spread out. Yoma v'kedma, east and north and south. East and west. Tzafena v'negma, north and south. That means in all directions, all over the world. And all the nations of the world, of earth, will bless themselves by your name and by your children. And then he continues on. God promises him that even though you're going now on a difficult journey, I'm here to protect you, and I will always travel with you. Do not be afraid. Then at some point, it says that Jacob wakes up from his sleep and he realizes that this is a holy ground. And he was unaware that this was holy ground. That's why he went to sleep there. And he's afraid. And here again he gets God's promise that he will be protected. And then Jacob erects a monument as a sign of this promise. And he commits to God that if you protect me and I return home in peace to my parents, I will obviously completely be committed to you forever and ever. And then the story continues, how Jacob continues on his journey, comes to Haran, has to deal with his very corrupt and shrewd Lavan, his uncle, in negotiating for a wife, and he fools him and deceives him. And basically, as he says later, 20 years I've been by you, and has been eating, he calls this, he's been basically suffering for 20 years without sleep, and basically and full of anxiety. So you have here a story of a man, a great man, embarks on a journey, and how difficult it is. But at the end of the story, he does return home, and this time with his family, with 11 children. The 12th tribe would be born in Binyamin when he's back in Israel, but he goes back and builds his family not in Israel, but in Haran. So, in the context of what I said earlier, that the Torah is above all not a Bible, not just a book of inspiration or poetry or history, or just telling us about our own ancestors. Torah above all, like the word Torah suggests, the word Torah means a guide, direction. Torah comes from the word light as well. It's a guiding light, a blueprint for life. So with that in mind, the question here is, what is the lesson here for our lives? So the Orach Chaim, a classic commentary right in the beginning of the chapter, he says, Vayetzi Yaakov Be'ersheva is referring to the descent of every soul to this earth. And using Kabbalistic terminology, Be'ersheva, the fountain of seven, refers to the source of where souls come from, which is the seven emotions in the world of Atzilut. So a soul, before it descends to this earth, originates on a spiritual plane. Think of it as a spiritual environment. If you're familiar with the sporadic structure of Kabbalah and Hasidic thought, some of you may be familiar with it from my book on the counting of the Omer, or from other places. So there's 7 spheres, 7 emotions. We have 7 attributes within ourselves, certain 7 faculties: Chesed, love; Gevura, which is discipline; compassion, ambition; humility, bonding, and dignity. Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayid, Yesod, Malchus. 7. So that's the fountain of 7. A fountain is a nurturing, a nourishing force, and that's where every soul is rooted in. And Vayetzi Yaakov Be'ersheva means Yaakov refers to every soul. Yaakov is the letters Yud, Akev. Yaakov is a Yud in the beginning, which means a spark. Like a Yud is a point, a spark, and Akev is a heel. So the spark of the divine enters into the heel of existence. So the soul from the 7 fountains descends into this earth. Vayelech Harana, and it embarks on a journey. Harana. Harana in Hebrew means wrath, place of wrath. This world is a world of wrath, a world of a lot of difficulty, pain, challenges, suffering. So in direct contrast to 7 fountains, Harana, the soul goes from a very spiritual environment into a very selfish environment, corrupt world where narcissism and self-interest and greed and all that comes with that is what dominates. So it's a radical descent for the soul, a very radical descent, a very difficult jump. And therefore there's much to fear. And when the soul is sent to this earth, it knows and it shudders and trembles from where it's entering. One of the reasons, according to Jewish mysticism, why a fetus develops over 9 months, God could have made it in a way that it should be just a day or 2 or a month. Why 9 months? Because the soul has to prepare itself and be acclimated and essentially armed with an arsenal to be able to handle the difficulties of this life. So those 9 months, which correspond to 9 spheres actually, are meant to give the soul the powers it will need to face a world, a hostile world. Now you could say, of course, when a newborn child enters the world, and hopefully into a healthy parent's home, there's no hostility. Yeah, but that's only the beginning. Later the child will grow and develop and ultimately leave home. And we live in a world that's a hostile world. Not every part of the world is hostile, but a lot of parts, many parts are. And it's a life that can hurt us. And does hurt us in many ways. There's pain, there's loss, there's, as I said, selfishness, and so on. So as soon as it enters into this world, it's already entering a world which is consciously disconnected from the divine, from the 7 springs, from the 7 fountains. So Charana is a way of describing in one word, a world of wrath, a world of anger, a world of disconnection. And this is the story of every person's life. Each of us goes on this journey. And every detail that follows in this chapter is all a story of your life. So what happens? The story continues as Jacob, as the sun sets, falls asleep. He falls asleep, he has a dream. This is a dream and a sleep that each of us will go through in our lives. And the dream and sleep has 2 sides to it. On one hand, the sleep is a sign of lack of consciousness. As we see, Jacob is disturbed by the fact that he was able to fall asleep in such a holy place. So number one, we will be very callous in our lives because of our disconnect, and we're not always aware of what is meant, what our calling is in life. There'll be times we may fall asleep in the wrong places. We'll fall asleep in a time when in a divine space you may completely be ignorant or be unaware of it. On the other hand, the sleep also leads him to a dream that again is given to each of us as a gift from Jacob. And what is the dream state? The dream state that there's a ladder. So this isn't just an accidental, random dream. The dream, in a sense, is really teaching the soul that even though you're going down to earth, into Charana, into a wrath of a hostile world, not all is lost. You're not trapped. If you build a ladder, you're able to connect a ladder from earth back to heaven. So yes, the soul comes down here, and it may feel as disconnected, but the ladder provides us with a secret formula of how one can free themselves from the shackles and from the trappings and from the darkness of this hostile Charana world. So the ladder is a key element which I want to discuss in detail here. The ladder. There are different interpretations in the Medrash and other places that describe what does the ladder symbolize. And there are different interpretations. One of them is the Zohar's interpretation that the ladder symbolizes prayer. And the ladder consisted of 4 rungs, which correspond to 4 stages in our prayers. I'll try to discuss that a little later, more in detail. But what is the significance of prayer? Prayer, which sometimes is called song actually, is a way for a soul to connect to something that's greater than itself. Now, today you don't even need any long elaboration. You see, walk down the street, an average street in Manhattan any given day, approximately 1 out of 2 people will have their earplugs, and they're listening to music. Some say it's even more than 1 out of 2. Music has become a force of nature, force in our culture and society. Yes, you could argue it's because it's so easy to listen to music and so on, but music has some power. I've suggested this, I've submitted this theory in the past. I believe music today has replaced religion in many ways. And a rock concert is nothing less than a cathedral. And the songs played are like prayers. And the ones playing them are like what were once cantors and rabbis or clergy. And especially those that are familiar with, and I've heard about it, never went to one, but I've heard about Grateful Dead concerts. That was like a pilgrimage. We prepared weeks or months beforehand and prepared all the proper, let's put it this way, offerings and incense as well, the different substances that help the experience along the experience. You familiar with this? Okay, well, and what's the point? The point being is because music speaks to the soul. It's not an accident we call music soul music. And there's actually a certain genre called soul. But in general, people say music touches me. It's a common word, it touches you. You put on the headsets or the little ones, whatever it is, the earplugs, and the whole world closes up. You close yourself off the world, and music transports you to another time and place. I was sitting in a subway once ago. It There's a guy sitting to me for at least an hour. It was a long ride, and he was just like he was oblivious of the whole subway. The whole place was laughing because he was going through antics. He basically was dancing in the subway, and completely unaware of anyone sitting there, which I found to be amazing. I thought to be quite interesting. I don't know how desperate he was, or not desperate, or he was just in a good mood. But music has that power, and there's something about its beat and its tempo and its sound that touches us in ways that regular words do not. Why don't you find the same thing someone listening to a good lecture, or someone listening to some other form of communication? Because there's something about music. Music has a rhythm to it. That touches us almost without any training. Not almost, actually without any training. Today there are studies that show that besides newborn children reacting to music, that you can see any time, but even children inside their mother's womb, when music is played, there's movements of that child. The child will move to the music, which of course begs the question: how does a child even know music? Language, you could say, is also a miracle. That a child at 2-3 years old can already be speaking. It's pretty miraculous. Like when you see it, it's hard to even imagine. But there you can say, okay, the child has intelligence, born with intelligence. The child needs to develop, and it mimics the sounds around of its parents and others around. So the child learns to speak, and to speak the language that the parents speak to the child, or the adults that are in proximity to the child. But music, how does a fetus know to even respond to music? How does a newborn know to respond? You have to say that there's something about the rhythm and the sound that is inherent inside that resonates. Is some type of chord that it touches inside the soul. Now, I didn't do a full study in it, but I don't know if secular psychology has yet even figured that out. In Judaism, it's stated very quickly, very easily. Music is the language of the soul. Now, long before the soul enters this earth, into this sphere, into this atmosphere, long before when it's in the fountain of seven, that's where it's ready. It is all about music. Soul only responds to music. Music and soul are synonymous. So it's not just a language of the soul, it is the soul. That's how the soul communicates. And it's regular conventional language that we speak to each other that the soul doesn't understand. That's where you could hear someone speak and like your ears will be deaf to what they have to say. Someone can say something, they think it's the most important thing, and you don't even listen. You're not even listening. A song is very hard to ignore. Someone sings a song, it can affect you. I remember giving a talk a number of years ago, it was right before Yom Kippur. And there was in a museum, a Jewish children's museum in Brooklyn, Crown Heights. So I was invited. There was a group of Sri Lankan monks that came to visit the museum. Of all places, Sri Lanka. How many rabbis speaking to Sri Lankan monks? Anyway, they came with the robes, and they're very, very fine, and their etiquette is extremely respectful. So I gave a talk. They understood English, so I spoke in English. I was speaking about some of the parallels of Jewish mysticism in context of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with Far Eastern mysticism. I thought it would be some common ground. And they're trained to not react to anything you say. So they don't laugh at jokes. They don't react. There's no nodding. There's no disagreeing. They just sit like stones, like monks, without any movement. It's very disconcerting because when you speak, you want to see a reaction. So then you're getting through. You're not getting through. You try a different joke. You try this. You try that. It's a way of, even though one person is speaking, there's a rapport going on, even if the listeners aren't speaking, but you see their body language. Like for example, if everybody falls asleep, it tells you something. Here I didn't know. I had no clue because they weren't falling asleep. They were awake. Their eyes were open, all staring at me like this. And no clue. It almost seemed to me like they didn't even understand the language I'm speaking, but out of respect, they were just looking at me. So I had no clue. Later I found out that they do listen, but they're trained not to react. That's how it is. But listen to this. Being that I was I didn't know whether I was getting through or not, so I decided, what? I stopped my talk in the middle of somewhere, and I said, I'd like to sing for you a song. And I began singing a Yom Kippur melody, a Hasidic melody. And everything changed. Their faces, their composure, they could not resist. Here they reacted. It was immediate. It was obvious. Because song has some type of language that is deeper than words. And later they actually told me they liked what I said. But words, at the end of the day, there's a certain filter, you can say. There's a block with words. Even the words get through to somebody. A song, you don't even need to know you don't even need to know the language. A song is a song. A melody doesn't have a language. It's international. No matter what language you speak, you can relate to a song. And another thing about song, an interesting thing, is when two people sing together, it's harmonious. When two people speak at the same time, it's not harmonious. It's called disturbing. It's called rudeness. Now, of course, I have to add, singing together means singing in tune. Like the joke that goes, what's worse than one person singing out of tune? It's two people singing out of tune. And if you ever heard that, it can be extremely grating on the nerves. But when people do sing in tune, music, the more people sing together, there's a unity, there's a harmony involved. Whereas in speaking, if everybody starts speaking at the same time, it's not going to be very pleasant. So song is a powerful tool, and prayer is called song. So this ladder that Jacob dreamed of, according to the Zohar, reflects prayer. Prayer is one example of how we escape and relieve ourselves from the tensions and the existential loneliness of this world, the traps. The key thing to remember is that we are trapped in this existence, and awareness of that is half the cure. For a person who says, for example, I'm not trapped, my life is perfect, or everything is great, it's always a sad moment when someone says that. Because it's important to recognize that we have many, many things that trap us. Just because your life seems to be going well, or because you feel good, or you're making money and you're healthy, doesn't mean your life is not trapped. It just means that maybe there's a sugar coating that's glossing over the realities of life. Now, a person like that, unfortunately, will be reminded when things aren't going that well. But people who are spiritually sensitive are always aware of the traps of this world. You don't have to fall into a pit to know there are pits around. There's a hostile world, even if you haven't tasted hostility. You know. So if you don't live a selfish existence and you see someone else suffering, you think that's not part of your life? Just because you're not suffering, or you're saying, okay, that person is unfortunate, has gotten the unfortunate, the bad side of the what do they call it? The other side of the stick. But if you think about it, you could have also gotten it. You just were lucky. And tomorrow may be your day. So to suggest that, what did Churchill say about appeasement? He said appeasement of tyrants, is feeding the crocodiles in the hope that you will be eaten last. Which is what many of us do. As long as someone else, it's not me. But if one person suffers in this world, according to the Torah, we're all suffering. Because it hasn't touched you yet, or because you feel it's not me, doesn't mean it's not you. It just means you decided to close yourself off in your little box. This world is a world that it can be very hurtful. And you don't have to wait to be hurt to realize that. From the Kabbalistic perspective, as I often talk about the Arizal, he says, there's a great symptom. God concealed His presence. As soon as God concealed His presence, this world has a potential to hurt. Because it's not a world that's aligned with truth. You can meet somebody, they could be smiling to you, and they stab you in the back. You never know who your real friends are. Now, so the fact that you have not yet been hurt doesn't mean you can be. So a wise person realizes if it's potential, I have to always be prepared that it's actual. That doesn't mean living a paranoid life or thinking negatively. It just means understanding that this world on its own can be a very hostile and dark place. And when you see someone suffering, it's also part of who you are. To put it in different terms, the Torah puts it that we're all parts of one large organism. So if one human being is hurting, it's just another part of your body, your soul. Again, the fact that you don't realize it or are insensitive is that's because you've chosen to separate yourself from the deeper truths. So the fact is, existence itself is on its own somewhat of a disconnect, and therefore we all need ladders. No matter what's happening in your life, we all need a ladder to be able to reach to a greater place. So there's an expression in the Talmud that says, Ein chavush mater satzme, which means a person in fetters. Chavush is someone who is trapped in a prison. Someone that's like tied up. Someone that's tied up, someone in fetters cannot free themselves on their own. If you're in a pit, you can't climb out on your own. You need someone to throw you a rope or ladder. Same thing psychologically. When you are trapped in your own fears, you can't free yourself because you're part of the problem. A person is lacking confidence, for example, or lacking courage in any given area. You could tell them today till tomorrow, get confidence, but they're actually suffering from lack of confidence. They are part of the problem. Which is why one of the beauties of life is to have friends, to have colleagues, to have teachers, to have anyone that can throw you that rope, can join with you, can give you some perspective that you cannot have on your own. So when you have your blind spots, or your own subjectivity, self-interest, it's vital to have another opinion, or else you can get yourself into real trouble, because you're the last person that can judge a situation where you are blinded or biased by. You know, when the scouts, in the Torah later we read about the scouts being sent by Moses into Israel, and they come back with a terrible report. So one of the statements they make, which is like the birth of projection, psychological projection, they come back and they say that we saw these giants, and in their eyes, in the giants' eyes, we were little midgets, little insects, little grasshoppers, and that's how we also saw ourselves. That's the expression. I'm sorry, that's the other way. We saw ourselves as grasshoppers, and that's how and that's how they saw us as well. Which is a strange statement, because if you see a giant that's actually far greater than you are, that's an objective reality. The giant is bigger, and that's how it is. Why does the Torah say we saw ourselves that way, and that's how they looked at us? That's projection. You see yourself as small, everyone else will see you as small. You see yourself as strong and great, others will see you that way. And I'm not talking about faking it or putting on a show. We're talking about true projection. True courage and confidence projects confidence. When someone is really exuding confidence, you have confidence in them. When you sense that they don't have confidence, and you sense weakness or tentativeness, it doesn't build any confidence. You won't have confidence in them. You see a commander-in-chief or a leader, and there's a challenge, and you see how they forge ahead, and they make a quick decision. This is what we're going to do. That's what cultivates confidence in all of us. Confidence breeds confidence. If you see someone that's tentative, questions themselves, second guesses, obviously you're not going to really be very, very comfortable following a person like that, because you don't sense that they have the strength. So projection means that we are able to be our own worst enemies, because when we're subjective, we don't see things clearly. And that's why all of us need to have that ladder. So the first thing is to know that we live in a world where, despite our comforts and despite where things may be working well, there is a fundamental darkness. There's a story, I've told this story many times here in the class. One of the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, was a little child, and he was reading in the Torah. His birthday is around the Parsha Vayera, chapter we read a few weeks ago. And he's reading, and he went into his grandfather for a blessing for his birthday. And when he came in, he starts crying. His grandfather says, "Why are you crying?" He says, "I'm crying because we just read in the Torah, we just read the story of Abraham, that God appeared to Abraham. I'm crying, why doesn't he appear to me?" And his grandfather, Tzemach Tzedek, answered, because when a Jew, a tzaddik, decides at 99 to circumcise himself, he's worthy of God appearing to him. But that's the second half of the story. The first half is this: what was he crying about? So most people, when you see someone cry, it's usually they're in pain, they stub their toe, or they feel that someone stole something from them, or there's some other loss, some situation. Here you have a man crying, a Rebbe who would later become a great Rebbe. He's only 4 or 5 years old, crying because God is not seen. He doesn't see God. You know how many people that cry over not seeing God? Now, why is that a pain? Why is that a reason to cry? Because you don't need to wait for the train to hit the train that goes over a cliff. You don't need to wait for the hit the what do we say? To crash to the ground once the train goes over the cliff. As soon as you see it go over the cliff, that's when you should be worried. The source of all problems, we have the symptoms and we have the roots. Someone who's really sensitive doesn't wait for the symptom. They see the root of things. The root of all pain is a world that's detached from its source. A world detached from its creator. Go back to what I said earlier about the organism. How is it possible, some mystics wonder, that human beings who are all created by one God, all parts of one organism, how is it possible that they could hurt each other? You go to war, they can murder each other, steal from each other, hurt each other in so many different ways. If they're all part of one integral unity, how is that possible? The answer is, as the Talmud says, a person doesn't do a sin until there's a moment of insanity, blindness. We don't feel that it's part of one entity. You know, in the human body, a healthy human body, is it possible that one part of the body is going to attack another part? Your right hand does something wrong, your left hand will hurt it? God forbid, in certain autoimmune diseases, when a body turns on itself, it's a tragic thing. Because the body's not recognizing that this is its own body. Essentially, the mystics say the whole reality that we live in is one big distortion. It's a distortion that we think that each of us are self-contained entities, when in truth we're all part of one organism. Look at people bemoaning or crying about the whole environment. We're dependent on the environment, and the environment is dependent on us. From photosynthesis to the ozone layer, to the different ecosystems that are at work, it all is what creates life as we know it. Why is it possible we can destroy our own sustenance? Because we're blinded, or we become so consumed with our own needs, we forget the long term and the future and the big picture. So essentially, life as we know it in this world is a dark world that's disconnected, which is why the soul cries when it enters into this world. It doesn't have to cry because it's suffering. It cries the mere fact that godliness is concealed, like that Rebbe Rashab, when he was a child. He cries, why can't I see the integral unity behind things? You don't wait for the symptoms. The root of the problem is the lack of that type of awareness. So this world is a trap, however you twist and turn it. Hasidic thought elaborates on this, and it's fascinating because it's extremely difficult to teach a generation like ours this fact. In times of old, go back a few centuries, even a few decades, it wasn't difficult to explain to a Jew in a concentration camp, knowing that this world is a difficult, hostile place. Because they were being massacred in the most inhumane ways by the Nazis. So no one had to be reminded that they're living in a prison. The same go back a century ago, 2 centuries ago. We lived under the reign of a monarch, of fascists, and different type of... I mean, once in a while there was someone benevolent. But basically, it was a world that was in prison. Today, it's far more difficult to teach someone that they were in prison. Any young American boy or girl, 16, 17 years old, whatever age, ask them, are you in prison? They'll say, no, I have every freedom. I have my iPhones and iPads and my internet, anything I want. We're not in war. This country, thank God, has not seen a war on this soil since Civil War. Things are great. The biggest battles being fought are video games, are on football fields, and so on. So it's a great blessing. No question about it. The blessing of prosperity, of comfort, of a high standard of living, ease of living. You can get anything you want at any time. The curse of it is the delusion it creates. The delusion it creates is that we're healthy. Are we healthier? Are relationships that much more enduring? Are families being built and children being brought up into this world in a healthy world? Is there less abuse? Anything that really matters, the matters that really create more love, is there more love in this world? There's more selfishness, if anything. Because prosperity tends to lean itself towards self-absorption. So though it's a blessing, but like any blessing, when you have abundance, it creates apathy and complacency. And as I said, self-absorption. When people are suffering, it's a curse. But at least they know that they're in trouble. And often we'll turn to each other in times like that because we're in the same situation. Today it's very easy to live in prosperity, and right next door there's someone living in poverty. That's reality. Class structures. So our blessing of our times is also our curse because we don't even know there's a real trap. And it's difficult to tell people The only time people wake up is when they actually suffer. Something doesn't work. I meet people all the time like this. Suddenly they break up with their girlfriend or boyfriend. They have a loss in the family. They lost their job. They lost a fortune or something like that. And they say, oh, look how difficult life is. And that's when they look for help. Which I understand. I'm not being critical. Because when you're riding high, as I said before, it glosses over all the issues. And you can convince yourself everything is great. I meet people, I don't want to even say it in negative terms, but the most unhealthy people that I know, they think everything is great. Because everything is glossed over. It's like like sugar coated, and everything is right. They're riding fine. And then when the day comes, and not that I wish it upon them, then suddenly it all comes crashing down. They have no resources at all. They're clueless, basically. And suddenly they say, what am I supposed to do? And why is someone else able to overcome challenges? So go tell them that you're living a lie, you're blind. Who wants to even say that? And again, I don't wish it on anyone. But it's part of reality of life. This world can deceive us into thinking that everything is cool, everything is fine. When a Rebbe cries that he doesn't see God, it's a wake-up call that we all can cry once in a while, even if everything seems to be shining. The sun was shining also over Auschwitz. Beautiful sun, and birds were chirping, and the sky was blue, and the Bavarian mountains in Germany were very, very beautiful, picturesque, while people were being killed in the worst possible way. So, nature has its way of also seeming to create an illusion. Everything is nice. One of the most chilling and powerful articles written was by, I think it was Abe Rosenthal, who was a young reporter for the New York Times when the camps were liberated in 1945. And I don't remember the exact words, but you can find it probably online. He writes when he walks into the first time, I think, into Birkenau, one of these concentration camps. And this is days after the liberation, literally days after. So the soil was still drenched with blood. And you saw body parts. And I don't want to go into all the graphic details. So he describes what he sees. He doesn't describe what he heard was happening. He describes what he sees. He says the grass is beginning to sprout. And when you look underneath it, it's covering up the blood that has been drenched here. The ashes of human bodies. And he talks about the insensitivity almost of nature. How nature is completely heartless. It just continues, the grass will grow, and he says, that's the tragedy. That nature doesn't protest what just happened here. Like this should be a place where no grass should ever grow again. This is a place which should be barren like a wilderness. And yet, nature just continues to grow. You come back in a few years, there'll be beautiful flowers and trees and birds and so on. So we understand we're not taking nature on trial here, but it just shows you how the world can be a place that was such horror. Everything can seem so perfect, so beautiful. I remember meeting a Holocaust survivor in London. And I gave a talk there about darkness and light. I told the story about, the Talmud tells the story that when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, so the Torah says that Shabbos, it was Friday when they were created, and that Friday night the sun never set. Because it was the first Shabbos on earth, so God let it to, there was no dark, there was no night. The sun shined all night. So it was 36 hours of light. It's Friday day, Friday night, and then Saturday day. And then, as the sun started setting Saturday night, Adam and Eve began to tremble. Why? Because it's the first time in existence they saw night. They thought that they had destroyed the world. And they thought as the sun was setting, the world was coming to an end. Imagine, you never saw night before. And suddenly a bright day starts turning cloudy, starts turning dusk, and starts turning dark, and to the point of pitch dark. So they thought they had destroyed the world. So they couldn't go to sleep that Saturday night. And they were praying all night and asking for forgiveness for what they had done. They thought, because they had eaten from the tree of knowledge, they had destroyed the world. And they stayed up all night praying tshuva and all that. As the morning, as the dawn began to break, they realized, the Talmud says, Elam Kiminagi, this is the way of the world. The sun sets, the sun rises. They realized they had not destroyed the world. So when you read the Talmud literally, it can be read several ways. That their tshuva really woke them up and they really were awakened. Or you can read it, they said, you know what? We can go to sleep now. We thought we destroyed the world. It's not that way. It's just nature of world. The world gets dark, the world gets light. But in truth is, that the darkness was a wake-up call. It was a reminder that sometimes, the world gets dark. Anyway, I told the story, and a guy, a Holocaust survivor, came over to me afterwards and told me, I don't know why God told you to put these words into your mouth that you should tell the story, but this is a story of my life, what you just shared. He said, I was a a teenager during the Holocaust. And I was in one of the bunks, what do they call them? Where they would sleep, the barracks. And you see the pictures of them. He says, and I would sleep there, and we were exhausted, hungry, our lives were completely shattered. My family was taken away, they all were killed. I think he said maybe a brother remained, whatever. And he says, and I remember, sometimes just exhausted, you just fell asleep. And I would fall asleep and I would dream. I don't know if you dreamt of a ladder. And I would dream, and then you wake up with the dawn breaking. And for a split second, you forgot where you were. He says, I remember the sun shining through the window of the barrack. And I saw the mountains, and I saw the blue sky, and I saw the clouds. And I thought for a moment I was like in heaven. I was like, beautiful place. Then 5 seconds later, I realized I'm in hell. Just having a nice view from hell. And he literally says, you become fixated on objects. I became angry at the sun. I literally would curse the sun every morning. What right do you have to shine when this is going on in this world? One morning you shouldn't rise in protest. Now I know it sounds weird, but anyone who's gone through anything real serious trauma or abuse, there's a certain, you get connected to objects and everything becomes very magnified. So what he said to me, I was angry at the sun, I was angry at nature. What kind of right do you have to shine in the morning and not protest to the world what is going on in this hell, this dark place? He saw it as like a betrayal. Such darkness, and here you have a sun shining, like all is cool. Everything's good. He says, once we were freed from the camps, I really could not stand looking at the sun. I couldn't stand anything that looked nice. Beauty to me was a curse. Because what right did that beauty have to be there? It's not beautiful. If it's covering up something that's ugly, that's called beauty? That's just the worst ugliness, because it's making believe like it's beautiful. And he said, I have to tell you that for years I suffered, obviously from the whole experience. Everything beautiful, everything that looked good in the world to me was a curse, etc. He says, one morning I woke up, and the sun was shining in my eyes, and I said, thank God for the sun. Because I said to myself, just like after a dark night, the sun rises, then maybe after the darkness I experienced, the sun will rise in my life again. And I began looking at the sun as an ally. Because it's true, the sun betrayed me then, but the sun now is waking me up as well, giving me hope. Some story I never forgot, a ray of hope that the sun gave. This is a Holocaust survivor who's entitled to his own journey, and we have to respect that. But this is a perfect example of what I was saying before. We can live in a world where everything is so bright and shiny and prosperity. Thank God, I know we're not in a Holocaust now, and we should never know of anything of that nature. It should only be blessings. But in a light world like this, the sun could be shining, and there's a person who's crying and can't even get out of bed. You may be thinking you made so much success, you're so successful today, and you have people who are hurting. The person who's sensitive realizes that, and realizes that in a world like ours, it's a broken world. Just because you're blessed doesn't mean it's not a broken world. It means you were blessed to be protected for a while. Never take your blessings for granted. Not just because it can come around, but because we live in a world, we need to know that we're not just alone. No man is an island, as the poets write. And that's why we break a glass under the chuppah, by the way. Why do we remind ourselves at the highest point of joy, destruction? Because you should always know that even if your life is beautiful right now, you're marrying, you're in the height of your life, you're at a high point, you break a glass, you remember the world is still a broken place, there's still broken hearts and souls. So we all need a ladder. But to go now get back to the ladder, what does the ladder do? First of all, it's the awareness. You have to know that this world is charan, it's a place of wrath. And the fact that you may not feel it doesn't mean it's less wrath. It just means you've just been protected. So that's number one, awareness. When there's awareness, then you begin to build a ladder. Because you feel the need to build one. And a ladder is grounded on the ground, but it climbs into the heavens. So a ladder has many lessons for us. One lesson is the story with another story with the Tzemach Tzedek. He was once a child playing on a ladder with other children. All the other children were afraid to climb to the top. He climbed all the way to the top. His grandfather, the Alter Rebbe Rav Shneur Zalman, said, "Why were you?" The only Mendele, his name was. He said, "Why were you not afraid to climb to the top of the ladder like the other kids?" He said, "Simple Zayda, Grandpa. The other children, when they were climbing, they kept looking down, so they saw how high they were. They were frightened, so they scampered down. They were afraid to climb higher. When I was climbing, I kept looking up, so I saw how low I was, and it motivated me to climb higher." Now you can imagine this child what he would grow up to be. But it's a tremendous lesson. Where are we looking? Unfortunately, and this is so simple but so profound, when we have a problem, we always look at the problem. And the problem weighs us down, and we're looking down, we don't look up. Because part of the problem is I want to solve my problem, so you're either in pain or the darkness begins to control you. What I said earlier, the subjectivity of our troubles is itself the force that blinds us from reaching to help. So one of the first steps is you must know how to look up. You must have a perspective. This is one of the reasons that one has to, it's called preemptive medicine. Preventive and preemptive medicine. You don't wait till there's a crisis to reinforce your arsenal, your resources. You build them beforehand. Look at armies. How much training goes into an average army? Who knows how much? 98% of their time is training. For the possibility of that 1-2% chance when there may be God forbid, an actual war. Why do they need so much training? Because if you're going to go to war without training, you won't know how to do it. Building a perspective to be able to look up to heaven is something we all can do, and you do it in the years of plenty. You don't wait when things are crisis. When a person's in crisis, it's very difficult. We're too desperate. When you're running from a fire, it's very hard to sit someone down and say, listen, there's a big heaven there, there's a big picture. They say, I'm running for my life. What are you pontificating? But if you do it, if a person's drowning, we know the drowning syndrome. Person drowning, they'll thrash about, they'll even drag down anyone coming to save them. That's why in lifeguards you need to be trained exactly how to protect the person from themselves. So in times of desperation, crisis, when the fire is burning, to start saying, okay, let's sit down and discuss, there's another alternative, most people can't hear that. When you're already depressed, you can't hear about another bigger picture. So the key thing is to build it beforehand. One of the reasons we teach our children Torah, not just science and mathematics and literature and penmanship and the rest of it, is because the Torah teaches you about a different reality. Science can't teach you about another reality. It can teach you about what makes this reality work. It teaches you what makes the clock tick and what makes the universe tick. But it can't teach you about a bigger perspective. All it can teach you is about existence. The whole beauty of Torah in Judaism is to teach you about something beyond existence. Why? Because then you have something to look to when existence betrays you, so to speak, or when you're challenged by existence. Now, so I never know if you ever heard it quite put this way, but when the Mishnah says, "En lecha ben chayrin ela misha esek b'Torah," there's no one that's free except someone that studies Torah. Mind you, it doesn't say, by the way, someone who studies Torah is free, but you cannot be free without Torah. Why? Because true freedom requires a perspective that's outside of our own. Einstein and other scientists put it this way: you cannot change a system from within the system. Because when you're in the system, you solve problems from within by the rules of the system. Even though I don't like quoting him, but Henry Ford, right? So he was asked, how much market research did you do when you invented the automobile? He said, I didn't do any research. Why? Because if I would have asked people what they want, they'd say they want a faster horse. They're not going to say they want an automobile. No one ever thought of it. Because you look at your reality and you make it better. I have a horse that goes that fast, I'll get a better horse. Steve Jobs was the same. They asked him how much market research. He says, because people don't know what they want. What they want is from what they have. They want something better. If you really want to give them something innovative, you have to give them something that they didn't imagine. And show them this is something that can help you. I mean, simple lessons. And you can think, how come everybody doesn't come up with this idea? Because we are trapped. That's why we have to be a little crazy to think out of the box. As Steve Jobs said as well. That only those people crazy enough to think that they can change the world are the ones that do. And there aren't many that do that. I guarantee you the Wright brothers were not completely in their sane minds. Who would think they can suddenly discover to build flying ships? It's a little crazy. I'm not saying that I'm not talking about mentally or clinically insane, but there was clearly something about them that were probably not regular. Someone comes to you and says, listen, give me an investment of $100. I'm going to create a flying ship that's going to weigh a few tons and is going to fly in the sky. Really. Okay, we see birds, and it's nice to be a bird, and human beings have always aspired to emulate that which they've seen. And every time you fly in a plane, every time a plane takes off, I'm in a plane, I'm always, to me, a tremendous lesson in life. There's no such thing as impossible. Some crazy people applied themselves, they figured it out, and they got it going. I don't know what their intention was, and I don't know if it was based on faith, but it definitely was based on some insanity, some type of out-of-the-box thinking. And they did it. Now we have airports, entire cities, and industries built on airports, and now, of course, the lines that we have to do and take off our shoes and all that, of course, also comes with the turf. And Bin Laden still haunts the Western air travel, or the entire world's air travel, for that matter. Okay, but that's a separate point. But the point I'm trying to make is that you hear a mother, where all doctors write off her autistic child and say, put him away in a home. And the mother says, no, this is my child, like any child of mine. And the mother works day after day talking to this child, and the doctors say she's crazy. You never get through it. It's a medical condition. It's impossible to speak to an autistic child. It's impossible to create a social connection. And then you suddenly see, years later, not the child is healed, but you see there's a connection. There's a look in the eye. What was the mother? She will not take no for an answer. These are building ladders. This is exactly the words. A ladder, its feet firmly planted on the ground, but its head is in the heavens. It's not so simple. Our head in the heavens. One of the Hasidic Rebbe Rashab, the same Rebbe Rashab, he had a student who was a great student and studied and was a scholar. Then he went into business, and he made a lot of money. You know what his industry was? It was also out of the box at the time. You may laugh, but it was galoshes. Galoshes manufacturer. Galoshes? They put on shoes, like boots. Now, why was it a big hit? Because there were no pavement yet, so the muddy streets. So you can imagine the galoshes saved many shoes, so it became very popular. Galoshes. Hey, you can make money with anything. So anyway, this guy his business grew, and he became more and more immersed in it. One day he comes back to his Rebbe for a holiday, and the Rebbe gives one look at his face. He sees where his head is at. So the Rebbe smiles and says, I've seen feet in galoshes, but I've never seen a head in galoshes. Because his whole head was not looking to heaven. Yeah, we have to have our feet in galoshes. You have to have your feet firmly planted around. You can't be floating in the sky. But where are your eyes? Where's your head? So many of us are 100% immersed in our businesses, immersed in our survival, immersed in the means, not in the end. Of course you need to do business ethically, and you need to be involved. You can't do a business without investing in it, without applying yourself. The question is, do you reserve anything for heaven? She'll say, okay, you know what, everything is working well. Why do I have to do that? Well, as I said before, just because you think it's working well, it doesn't mean it is. And the day will come, once you're in crisis, to then say, I'm going to look into heaven. You haven't looked at heaven 50 years. Suddenly you're going to start looking? This is why we study Torah. This is why even in a busy scheduled day, in the morning, in the evening, you find the hour, you fit it into your schedule, you put your head into the clouds. You have to see a bigger reality, an existence that's not our own. And that's what the symbolism of the ladder is. A ladder that reaches upward. It's really a symbol for ourselves. Do we have that ladder in our lives? Each of us must build such a ladder, each in our own way. And it's not just a nice luxury. It's a lifesaver. A lifesaver at all times, but especially when you really need it, because then you have something to turn to. You have something to hold on to. A person, in investments they say diversify, right? Now, if you put all your eggs in one basket or in the same type of baskets, what happens when those baskets aren't there? You lose it all. So one egg should be put into the heavenly basket to keep your eyes to something that's heavenly. The story when the previous Rebbe was arrested in 1927 by the Bolsheviks, and they wanted to erase every vestige of Judaism in the former Soviet Union. And he refused to cooperate. As he writes in his diary, he writes that if I felt that if I cooperate with in any way, I will have lost my spirit and my dignity. So he refused to cooperate. He wouldn't even speak Russian. He was fluent in Russian. He spoke in Yiddish. So one of his guards, who was a Jew, and actually whose grandfather was this Rebbe's grandfather, was a chassid of this Rebbe's grandfather. So he was what's called the Yevseksy. These were the Russian communists. They were the worst anti-Semites of them all, as I mentioned before. When a Jew is an anti-Semite, it's the worst type. And he pointed a gun to the Rebbe's head and said to him in Yiddish, this thing here has changed many people's mind. So it's time to start cooperating, Rebbe. And the Rebbe looked at him without blinking. He said to him, this toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. And this wasn't just a nice, he could have been shot on the spot. This was not like exactly a democratic system there. But he said it. And you know what happened? That guy was shot. And that Rebbe came out of Russia and ended up in America and built the whole Chabad movement here. In 1940 he arrived here. So the bottom line, what he was saying was very simple. Not that, God forbid, he wanted to die, but you can't frighten someone that has a heaven. You can frighten someone that has only an earth and many gods, one God, whatever is convenient. So of course, if you have nothing that is spiritual, nothing soulful, so someone threatens you with death, hey, nothing more important than to live. But for people who have spirit, there are more important things than just physical life. It's what your beliefs are, your legacy. I've shared this many times. The Jews in some of the camps, it was known that they sang Ani Mamin, I believe with complete faith, when they went to the gas chambers. They said Kaddish. They said Shema. Now you could think it's pretty crazy. Here they are, God has forsaken them in the deepest way. Where was their God? God had literally allowed 1.5 million innocent children to die. Innocent people, simply because they were Jewish. So why would they be thanking God and praying to God and so on? And Jews are not stupid people. And we're not talking about just fanatics. This was this was systematic. This was consistent. And the only answer is very simple, because Jews were saying, you can take our bodies, you can't take our souls. You can take our lives, you can't take our spirits. If it won't be us, it will be our children. If it won't be our children, it will be our grandchildren. So we may go to the gas chamber, but our faith will not be extinguished. That is a person who knows how to look to heaven. And Viktor Frankl, who by no means was a observant or religious Jew, writes, developed a whole philosophy, full psychology of logotherapy, man in search of meaning, just on this, what he witnessed in those camps. He said the people who had faith and meaning were able in some way to make it through, where those that didn't couldn't make it. Not that they suffer less. It's still charon. It's still the ladder is still on the ground, but they have something to hold on to in the worst times. So everything can be stripped of you, but they have that, and that's unbelievable power to be able to hold on to heaven when you don't have earth, or earth has betrayed you. Now, God forbid, again, anyone should ever wait for that. But that means that even in prosperity, when you do have earth and when you do have the blessings of life, that still provides something that this material world cannot provide. That is eternity, immortality. Anyone who's ever been blessed with a child, or blessed with walking a child to the chuppah, to marriage, doesn't need any explanation to what I'm saying. Because you see immortality, you see eternity. Some of us not blessed with children, there are other ways you can see it. The impact, the goodness that you do with someone. You teach someone, it's considered as if you gave birth to them. Eternity is something that is very rare in our world. Everything dies. Our food is digested, our money dries up, our health goes, our age, everything physical in the physical world dies. The only thing that doesn't die is our souls. Because that's the eternal part of ourselves. And that's what Jacob was holding on to. That's why he was able to deal with the most difficult situations. And this is what we were always able to deal with. Thank God today we don't need to deal with death and murder and genocides and holocausts. But we have the different challenge, the one of apathy. The apathy that comes with comforts and prosperity. In many ways, it's a bite, it's a sting, it's a poison, a toxin that's even worse than any outside enemy, because then it's an enemy from within. I meet people that there's such emptiness, such meaninglessness to their existence. They have everything, but they have no direction. Where are you going with your life? I have no clue. Buying time. And some people have all the money to buy a lot of time. But, time you really can't buy. The clock ticks. Where are you going? What's your direct? What's your goal? What's your calling? So, people come up with all kinds of nice cliches, like, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to build one day a family, other stuff. It's very nice lines. Bottom line is, do they do that? And what lasts and what remains? This world is a very, very seductive world. Money is one of the most seductive forces. And everything that's materialistic is seductive. It's what you see, it's what you taste, touch, and smell. Just look at the food industry. And all of us. Food industry. How many trillions of dollars are spent on food? And on design of food, and restaurants, and cuisine, and this and that, and wine tasting. Every type of food. Every few months you get another type of, something else is in style. So I made an estimate once. I wrote an article called The Power of 8 Seconds. I estimated, I simply tested it. I put food in my mouth, some food that takes a while. And I estimated that average food takes around 8 seconds from the time you put it into your mouth until it goes into your gullet, where it all becomes the same mush anyway. And I don't mean to sound, make anyone lose their appetite. 8 seconds. Interesting. So what do we do for those 8 seconds? How much money will we spend for that taste? If it was IV and you got the food straight into your blood, you'd need the same nourishment. And no one should ever get it that way. It'd save a lot of money. What can I say? But that's how it is. For that taste, for a taste that will last for just a few seconds. That's the power of this material world. I mean, we laugh. You think about it. You say, it's true. And by the way, next time you put something you really like in your mouth, guaranteed it won't take away any of your pleasure, or it'll still seduce you even while you're aware of it. That's how powerful it is. You could be completely aware and say, this is ridiculous, and still do it. How do you like that? It's not like you're not aware and, okay, now I'm aware, I'm not going to be obsessed with it. It's not true. We're still obsessed. That story they tell, the Prince of Darkness analogy, where a guy lives his whole life indulging. He had all the money in the world. He was spoiled and just basically was abusive and just indulged in life in every possible way. And that was like the story of the Portrait of Dorian Gray, if you've read it, from Oscar Wilde. So he lived a life of complete gluttonous, what do they call it? Gluttonous. Another word I wanted to use. What's another word for gluttonous? Whatever. You get the idea. That type of life. Okay, day comes, he comes up to heaven, he dies. Day of reckoning. Judgment day. So, standing before the heavenly court, they start reading everything he did. And it's not a pleasant sight. They have a very serious list of every indulgence and every selfish act and how many people he hurt, all for his own little obsessions and pleasures. And they say to him, so, you have anything to say in your defense? Not really. I had a good time, what can I say? Now, price, I have to pay the price. But they don't judge right away, so they say you wait out in the heavenly corridors for the ruling. So he goes out into the halls of the heavenly halls, and of course he meets up with the famous devil, whatever you want to call him, the Prince of Darkness they call him. Prince of Darkness says, why are you so depressed? He says, listen, I lived a very good life, but it was a very selfish life, and now I have to pay the price, and it's not pleasant, I don't feel good about it. So he says, something? Don't feel bad. Let's make a deal. Okay, what's the deal? You give me your soul, I'll let you go back down to earth, and you can live your life again. This time you can do it the right way. So this guy was no fool. He said, that's a very nice deal, but you're going to send me back down. I won't remember all this. So I'll do everything again the same way. He says, no problem. I promise you, I'll give you also your memory. You'll remember this moment, you'll remember everything that happened, you'll remember the consequences, everything. The guy said, that's a pretty good deal. Okay. They sign the contract, he gives him his soul. He's born again. Returns to earth. And what do you think happens? And he knows everything. He remembers what happened, he remembers the consequences. He does everything exactly the same way again. This is one of the parables they use in healing. When people who are either addicted to alcohol, drugs, or other stuff, gambling, they always use this story, one of the famous stories they say, awareness means nothing. You could be aware of everything and do exactly the same thing again. Because there's some type of mental block or a moment of insanity when something material seduces you, and that's it. You may be knowing at the moment that it's completely wrong. You may even know that you're going to suffer consequences. Everybody wonders about the Anthony Wieners and the Elliot Spitzers and all these guys that didn't win the elections yesterday, because they would not be forgiven. Forget about whether their sins were big or not big, but you start saying they're public figures. Everything today is online. How could they behave so in ways that are just completely crazy? You're about to run for president or whatever. You're running for a high office, and suddenly you're tweeting or whatever, hanging around with the wrong things that are completely possible to be seen. They didn't even cover their tracks. Everything was recorded. It's moments of insanity. The Talmud says it. It's like the 8 seconds. Right now, the food, that's it. That's all I'm thinking about. Even though you may know it's poison going into your mouth, you may know it's going to destroy you, you just either you minimize it, you push it off, maybe it won't happen to me, maybe there'll be a miracle. I don't know, whatever it is that we do with our minds. This is the power of earth. And the need for ladders just tells you how important a ladder is. Now, how to deal with this food 8-second obsession? Frankly, if I knew, I wouldn't be a little overweight myself. So I can't really claim to be the one that knows how to solve that. But I do know the following: that when you create larger perspectives and you do put your mind in the clouds, it has to have an impact. Because the more that becomes a reality, the less it weakens the hold of material reality. That's how it works. Because remember, your mind can't be preoccupied with two things at once. The more real estate of your brain you give to spiritual things, the less real estate is given to material obsessions. Simple as that. Because they don't, it's like who's going to occupy your consciousness? That's why when you're giving, when you're charitable, when you're kind, when you're soulful, when you're musical, when you look upward, automatically it takes a part of your whole consciousness, your presence, your faculties, and putting it to something positive. It has to weaken the amount you invest elsewhere. You see it all the time. Well, if you don't do that, what happens is, who controls? The rest of it, just by default, whatever comes your way will control who you are. So, my friends, this way to deal with this building ladders is you begin immediately. You have to start implementing, adding into your day spiritual moments. It could be tonight, before going to sleep, reading a poem, a spiritual writing, studying something, a prayer, saying the prayer at night that I return my soul to you, entrust my soul. B'yotchav gedruchi padisi oisi KLMS is a prayer we say in the morning modani. Whatever it is, signposts that introduce into your life things that are of another world. And the more you have of that, the less this world begins to impact you. It's a very simple formula. But you have to do it. The hardest part is doing it, actually. Understanding, I guarantee everybody relates to the concept, and we all say, hey, it's a great idea. The question is whether you're going to do it or not. And that's where nobody can control. That's your choice. And don't wait to when the building starts burning or there's a crisis, God forbid, and say, I should have added a few things like that. You do it. Good time to do it is always the beginning of things. When a new couple get married, you implement it right away. Because when you implement it initially, it becomes part of your routine. When not, it's very difficult to add things to our routine because we always say, I don't have time, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll start when I'm a little free, let me get over this business deal, this thing, that thing. Excuses, we all know, are aplenty, galore. The question is whether you just need one reason to say, no, this is it. What more can I say? So we have this chapter that tells us how to build a ladder and how to climb the ladder. And when you build this ladder between yourself and heaven, it opens up channels of blessings, of clarity, and is the force that ultimately gives you the ability to not be trapped. That's the force. It sounds simple, but it's not simple, because when you're trapped, you're trapped. And you're trapped. Part of your trap is that you're trapped by being trapped, if you know what I'm saying. So the key here is to find friends, to find someone that's not yourself that helps you move out of that place and helps you, lifts you up. That's why studying with someone else is always a great idea. Because the other person helps you, you help them. Doing it yourself, Well, the same thing that trapped you may keep you also trapped in the same routine. You do it with someone else. I've been giving this class now for many years. I know many of you think you're getting something from me, but I'm getting something maybe even more from you. The mere fact that I teach it and I have to communicate it and I have to be here with you, and there's an energy that goes back and forth. So we never know who's doing more giving and more taking. It's all about building something that's outside of yourself, and as soon as you do that, you already have something that gives back tremendous. In this particular class, I cannot say. I mean, it's a list that goes on, endless list of benefits that I personally have grown from it in so many different ways. Hopefully, you can say the same. But it's been a journey that's gone now for over 3 decades, hopefully for many more years, and it's blossomed into all kinds of different stuff, which is what the Meaningful Life Center is all about. So I want to thank you and everybody listening, and anyone that's been part of the chains and this links in the chain that go back 1982, including Sonny Goldstein, who was the first guy that ever came to this. The first started, it was back in 1982, just passed away a few weeks ago. So I bless you all that you should build many ladders into the heavens themselves to learn how to dream and to aspire, and above all to get your dreams fulfilled. But it takes that little effort. Get your mind into something that's beyond you, something greater than your own needs, and what it returns to you is many times over the investment. And you should have a very blessed week, a Vayetze week, journey. Whatever challenges we have the power to build our families, to build our homes, to build a spiritual oasis even in the darkest places. And God blesses us just like He blessed Jacob, that we'll have the power to not just be ourselves intact, but to spread all over the earth. East, west, south, north, north, south. So everyone should have a very good week. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow evening. If you have not left your email address, please do so we can stay in contact. And again, I want to dedicate the class to my good friend Mark, and may his family and always be blessed with only simchas, and may everybody just have only joy and simchas in our lives. Thank you, and a very beautiful week. Thank you.